Part two. So whenever we left off in the last chapter, we finished talking about bone and connective tissue changes. The next thing we're going to talk about is that, and I do want to mention this thing with bone and connective tissue. There's a really interesting study right here that they actually did this study on dogs, and I know that dogs are not humans. However, I really think it's interesting whenever we see some actual thing where we now have scientific evidence that excessive running and excessive, although it does cause a change in those type 2X fibers, we really and truly see it not being linked to degenerative joint disease. This is great research for those of us that have been told our whole life that you're going to wear out your knees by running. By the way, this girl has no knee issues whatsoever, and you all know the mileage that I get and how I feel about running. So we see some things start to take place during the endocrine system adaptations. We all know that every single hormone has a receptor, and whenever we see those hormone receptors downloading, we actually see change starting to take place. We know that aerobic exercise is very sensitive to hormonal changes, and through those hormonal changes, we actually see ourselves potentially becoming more catabolic instead of anabolic, especially with excessive volume of running in particular, because it really and truly makes you slough off protein cells and use protein as your source of fuel. We talked about how that was sort of a gluconeogenesis kind of thing. Remember, we don't ever want to use muscle or a source of protein as fuel for the body. In a perfect world, we would use stored glycogen and then body fat as our fuel to keep us rolling through there. So we talk about different adaptations that go on, and I'm on page 124. It says that every athlete needs a basic level of cardiovascular endurance, if not just for their performance reasons, but if for their health reasons. We do know that a wide variety of training can influence those changes. Even if it is a type 2 athlete, they can still benefit from having a more efficient cardiovascular system. So whenever you look at the block on page 124 in the right-hand column, we see that aerobic endurance training results in a reduced level of body fat. Remember, we call that lipolysis. That's a good thing. Increased maximum oxygen uptake, increased running economy, that means efficiency, increased respiratory capacity, lower blood lactate concentrations at submaximal exercise, increased mitochondrial density, and increased capillary density. This also makes the body more efficient at utilizing all of those enzymes in your body that get the job done. So now, there are some external factors that actually change our levels of aerobic endurance. And I'm going to skip over and I'm going to have a conversation with you about something as crazy as hyperoxic breathing. I'm skipping something there. So come over onto page 127. Hyperoxic breathing is actually breathing oxygen enriched, like maybe breathing oxygen through a nasal cannula or sleeping in a hyperbaric chamber. This is kind of a little bit controversial because we actually see on page 128 that really and truly at sea level, you're really and truly breathing into saturations of 97, 98, 99%. So that's one of those things where more oxygen necessarily isn't better oxygen. It just is one of those things. And we do see athletes getting oxygen from time to time, but mainly if you're at sea level, that really isn't going to be a big issue. And then, oh my goodness, we talk about smoking. Surely I don't have to tell you that smoking is a cause of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, chronic bronchitis, and emphysema. We know that this reduction can take place in a short time. So basically, by the smoking section in my book, I actually wrote, seriously, we're not even going to spend any time talking about this because you know better, you're smart people. So let's talk about this thing called blood doping. Blood doping is actually a way of artificially increasing the amount of red blood cells you have in your body. There's two main ways that it's typically done. One of the ways is through the injection of a drug called EPO or erythropoietin. Now, erythropoietin has been used in many clinical settings to actually ensure that red blood cells do continue to grow, especially as maybe a patient is undergoing chemotherapy. This would not be a situation for the athlete. Blood doping is defined by the World Olympic Association, NCAA sports is illegal. Erythropoietin can be dangerous. Although it does increase your mitochondrial density, it really and truly is not worth it. At the bottom of right-hand column, page 128, we see that the health risks associated with blood doping further complicate the controversy surrounding it. We see things such as high levels of hematocrit levels, potential risk for pulmonary embolisms, stroke, myocardial infarction, which is the fancy name for just a heart attack. We see deep vein thrombosis. That's whenever you get a blood clot deep in one of the tissues of your muscles. We also see pulmonary embolisms, and we see crazy levels of arterial blood pressure and flu-like symptoms. When you artificially increase the amount of red blood cells that you have in your body, it actually makes your blood thicker. And with this thicker blood with a heavier viscosity, we see that being more dangerous when it's pumping throughout the body. So we're going to steer way away from injecting with erythropoietin. The other way that's a little bit more controversial is through blood transfusion. This is when an athlete will go and donate blood, and then they will store it on their own, and then about a week prior to the event they will go and get a blood transfusion to actually increase the number of red blood cells. Now, this was their blood and they are getting it transfused back in. I don't know about you, but you're smart people, and do you know how sick you really have to be to have a blood transfusion? This is not one of those situations. So again, both of them are illegal. Both of them would be for people that were sort of in a desperate situation, but we all know that desperate people do different things. But we're going to steer away from artificially transfusing, and we're going to stay away from using EPO because it's too dangerous and it's just not worth it in the end. We see on page 128 that the upper levels of your aerobic capacity really do have something to do with your genetics. You didn't get to pick your parents. Sorry. Maybe you did win the lottery of parenthood. It comes down to efficiency of the cardiovascular system. Each biological training adaptation is different, but it does have an upper limit. This is when we see, for people that might not have the superior genetic potential, we see them being put in situations where just this much of a performance adaptation really does help them. We're actually seeing right now in the world of competitive aerobic training in triathletes, we're actually seeing people that are your Ironman winners and your marathon winners actually choosing to procreate the species with their superior genetics. So you never know what's going on out there. There is engineering going on out there with people that are choosing those superior genetics. It's up to you. I don't know. It kind of takes the magic and the love out of it. See what you think about that. As far as age and sex, we do see that maximum aerobic power within adults does have some changes. When you get older, you do typically reduce your muscle mass, and remember, your heart is a muscle. So if we see that muscle mass declining with age, we actually could see the heart becoming less efficient, which is why I tell you to keep killing it in the gym your whole life so that you cannot have those decreases in your cardiovascular endurance. If you'll remember, there was a word that we talked about called sarcopenia, which is the loss of especially type 2X fibers in age. Same thing starts to happen with some of your aerobic fibers as well. So we don't want that to happen. And when it comes to males versus females, typically females rock within about a 73 to 80% maximum power output as compared to males. And there are some specific simple reasons for this. We actually see that typically women have a higher percentage of body fat, And we also see those hemoglobin levels being a little bit lower simply because of the size of the heart. If you take the average size male and you compare it to the average size female, the average size female is 73% smaller in frame size. So if you take those two averages, it really is about 73% different when those things come together. Now, I skipped over one of those external influences, and I'm flipping back onto page 125. The external influence that I want to talk about right now is altitude. At elevations greater than 3,900 feet, acute physiological adaptations come into play because there's less oxygen in the air. So I'm in Colorado Springs today, and we're at about 7,400 feet. And some of those things that we start to see happen in the body, your body starts to acclimate. And the first thing that it does is it increases your tidal volume. So you start breathing more frequently. So instead of those minute ventilations being around 12 to 15, they might jump up to where they're 20. And then the second thing that we see happening is we see an increase in that heart rate. So that cardiac output really and truly has to keep up with the fact that there's less available air, oxygen in the air that you're breathing. So we see some of these things, and check out this chart on page 127. We see an increase in the minute ventilations. We see body fluid changing. We see cardiac input increasing. We see submaximal heart rate increasing. We see these changes. Check out those bullets on page 127. We see the increased diffusion of the capacity of oxygen to get into those cardiovascular, those pulmonary membranes. It just gets harder. The interesting thing is within 10 to 14 days, you would acclimate to this, and then you would be this efficient machine because you have increased your mitochondrial density, and you have also increased those capillaries that come into play. They become more efficient. People that live at higher altitudes are better aerobic machines than those of us flatlanders. The interesting thing is you get to keep those changes for about a month once you return to sea level. So here's the thing, I'm only going to be here through Tuesday. I'm not going to get to reap those monster benefits of this altitude that I am going to be exposed to. So I won't be keeping them for a month, can't get them for 10 to 14 days. But I'm going to go out and get some right now. Again, I told you it was cold this morning. Got my gloves, got my beanie rocking, getting it on, heading out, get me some mileage in. I'll be back to finish this chapter. I'm going to go expose my lungs to the burning and the shaking, and that I'll let you know how that goes. The goal is about 3 miles. We get my day rolling this morning. It's cold out there, smart people. I'm going out to get some tools to build fearless champions. Remember, you're one of them. Thanks for going with me on this crazy journey. I'll see you for chapter 3 in a little bit. Bye.